This is a CBC podcast.
We've all heard this phrase herd immunity, right? And this has been kind of the light at the end of the tunnel that's going to herald the end of the pandemic. And health officials have said over and over that once we have 75% of our population vaccinated, then we can start lifting some restrictions, maybe open our borders again, and life can start to go back to a new normal. But what if it doesn't? What if we don't ever get to that magic 75%? Say vaccine hesitancy or a shortage of vaccine supplies mean we only get to like 70%. And who decided on that 75% number anyway? Well, here today to answer some questions for us is Rodney Russell. He is an immunology and virology professor at Memorial University in Newfoundland. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure to have you on. I guess we should start with the basics, Mr. Russell. Like, what is herd immunity and how does it work?
Herd immunity is the level of immunity that you have in a population, usually brought about by immunization, vaccines, and stuff like that.
Right. And here in New Brunswick, we've been hearing that we're going to get there. We're going to get to herd immunity when we have 75% of the total population vaccinated, which is supposed to be by July 1st. So why 75%? Like, where would that number come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't know. There's no magic number. Nobody is sure exactly what that number should be. The number comes from history. We know that once we reach that level of vaccination of the population in the cases of other pathogens, we saw decreases in spread, and we saw that you generally saw a decrease in the amount of virus in the population once you reach that level.
I mean, a big segment of the population that's left out of this is kids, right? Because we're not vaccinating kids under 16. So how reasonable is it that we would get to 75% given that? That's
the sort of dirty little secret of all this is if we're not vaccinating children, we obviously won't get to 75. The children, for the most part, aren't getting that sick, right? So from the beginning, the priority has been to vaccinate the most vulnerable, which has been the older population. That's obviously changing a little now. Of course, we're seeing younger people getting pretty sick. It's a moving target, and it is changing on us. But there are trials going on. So Pfizer, for example, released pretty good data recently, or results at least, saying that their vaccine was safe and working in higher age teens. So I think that will come. But for now, the priority will be to vaccinate as many as we can. The problem I see is that it seems like we think once we reach a certain number, that's it, the virus is going to go away. And I think the important thing for people to realize is that the virus won't just say, okay, you beat me and I'm going home. Once we hit 60, 70, 80% vaccination, there's still going to be virus out there. We have high-level vaccination of other viruses, so you won't get outbreaks. But there still will be infections in the population.
Right. And the issue of not vaccinating kids at this point isn't the only issue. There was a shocker of a number that we learned last week. Like only 59% of the province's long-term care home workers, for example, have chosen to get the vaccine. So how could we or should we be tackling that issue?
Yeah, that's a concern. I think the only thing we can do is communication. I think, we need to, when people get vaccinated and they, we're going to have a few. We saw yesterday, unfortunately, one death down in Canada due to a blood clot, and it's a real possibility. It's a very, very, very rare event, but I think people need to let everyone know that when they get the vaccine, that they didn't, they were fine and they were safe, and we will see numbers going up. I think we're just starting to see the results now of the immunization programs. Cases are going way down in long-term care facilities, at least in most places where we've had full vaccination. So I think once the numbers start to come out and we see cases going down, people will start to have more faith in the vaccines, but it's a concern. And all we can do is try to communicate safety and effectiveness.
Concern, that's a word that we've been hearing a lot this week. We actually have 4 variants of concern here in New Brunswick now, as we've heard. So how do they factor into this herd immunity equation?
Right. So the variants, I've been saying they all have a superpower. The one we know best now, the B117, which is likely responsible for the outbreak you're seeing in the Halifax, Nova Scotia area now, that one, its superpower is to spread faster. So we know the vaccines work equally well against that one as it did against the original versions. But the other ones, the P1, the P2, the 1351, they definitely have a mutation, E488K mutation in the spike protein, that affects how well the antibodies recognize that virus. So it definitely reduces the effectiveness of the vaccines. And if those variants become dominant in any area, it's going to be a problem. So the vaccines won't even work as well as they should be working against the original strains.
Mm-hmm. It's concerning, though, because, there's an impact, one would assume, on a higher percentage of people getting vaccinated alongside, though, this proliferation of variants.
Yeah. Well, what people need to remember is that the immune response is not a or no thing, right? If you get the vaccine, you will make a response. And even if it's a variant, you'll still have immunity. You might not get, the best top protective immunity that'll keep you from actually getting infected, but you are making antibodies, you are making T-cell responses. So even if it's a variant that's you're exposed to, you will still have immunity, and it'll keep you from probably ending up in the hospital is the main point, right?
Right. So let's say with all these factors, not vaccinating kids, vaccine hesitancy, new variants, all of these things, let's say if we only get to like 60%, would that be enough to make things demonstrably better, to contain outbreaks, let's say?
I think so. I think we'll be in a much better situation. We've gone from a situation where nobody had immunity to even at that number, more than half of us. So if you think about the virus, typically one person that's infected infects two other people is sort of the R0 value we've been working with. It can be a little higher with some of the variants, but typically one person infects two others is sort of what we've been dealing with. So if half of, if one of those two people is vaccinated and doesn't get infected, or at least doesn't get too sick and doesn't spread themselves, then you're going to cut the transmission by at least 50% by my guesses. So I think you won't have massive crazy outbreaks like you're seeing right now in Halifax. But you're going to have an infection. And I think at the end of the day, the best case scenario is that we have, levels of sickness close to what we have with the flu, a manageable level. That may be the best we can hope for the next few years.
How much is this going to change, this information around herd immunity and vaccines? Like, can we expect this to continue to evolve just like everything has throughout the pandemic?
Sadly, yes. This has been the fastest moving target I've seen in my research career. Early on, I kept saying, well, we'll see how the vaccines work when they come, and we'll see if the vaccines work next year against whatever strain or variant is around next year. But this virus didn't wait till next year. It started mutating right away, mutating different ways, different variants in different parts of the world. So and again, that's because there was no immunity. So we were just an open field for that virus to run around in, right? But as we get vaccinated, it'll be more and more difficult for the virus to, spread and mutate. And but yeah, there's no doubt anything could happen at this point. We could right now end up with a variant that completely blocks or knocks out the effectiveness of all the vaccines, which is the worst case scenario, a true immune escape mutant. We hope that doesn't happen, but we have to keep in mind that it is possible.
Mr. Russell, that's a scary thought.
I know. I hate to monger fear, but we need to be realistic that this virus is changing right in front of us, and we can't take our foot off the gas is the point, right?
Right. So if you could offer one bit of advice as a professor of this, as someone who studies immunology, in terms of finding your way out of this, ultimately, what would that be?
Get vaccinated. Everyone should get vaccinated because, like I said, even if you can still get infected, even if you can still spread a little bit, it's the more people infected, the more people that are really sick, the more this virus will spread. So if we get vaccinated and we don't get infected, or at least we get mild infections, that will curb the spread of the virus, which will get us back to normal eventually.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Hopefully things are continuing to trend the way they are in Newfoundland right now.
Well, yeah, but we're also a little, we've seen it can blow up so quickly. So we're happy, but we're also nervous.
Good luck over there.
Thanks.
That was Rodney Russell, professor of immunology and virology at Memorial University in Newfoundland.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.